From the Great Rocky Mountains with photographers from all over the world, you are listening to the Rocky Mountain Photography Show. I'm your host, Jeff Futter, and thank you for listening. This is episode 5. I've got Neil Simmons and Bryan Maltais with us. How are you both doing today?
Real good. Thank you.
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, Jeff.
Absolutely. Thanks for being here. So today we're going to talk a little bit about nature photography to start us out. Neil, do you want to tell us a little bit about your photography and what you do exactly?
Sure. I have been a professional photographer for a long time. Certainly mix in, wildlife, landscape photography. I still even commercially do weddings, family portraits, things like that.
Yeah, and then so my name is Bryan Maltais, and I'm based in Fort Collins, Colorado, and I'm a nature photographer. Pretty much shoot everything. So I do landscapes, night sky, macro, and wildlife. And I basically sell prints, run workshops, and am an author of books.
Bryan, can you tell me, when you go out to take a picture, how do you choose a location for landscapes?
Yeah, that's a great question. Unfortunately, we're only limited to about an hour, right? So no, I'm just kidding. So there's a lot of scouting and research involved. So it starts at home, right? So I'll use Google Maps and maybe Gaia to check out the topography and where the light is going to be best. I use a lot of apps too, so it depends on whether we're talking about landscapes or wildlife or night sky. So, for example, I do a lot of Milky Way shooting, and I like to use Stellarium a lot. And I also use Google Earth night mode just to make sure the Milky Way is where I want it to be. But more importantly is where the landscape falls beneath it. So, for example, the Milky Way rises in the eastern sky, so you want an east-facing landscape. If you're going to do star trails, the North Star is obviously to the north, so you want a south-facing landscape. But then, if we're talking about wildlife, then that's very season dependent. It depends on when the animals are breeding, feeding, all of that. So a lot of research. So, 90% of every shot is planning.
It's just curious. You do star trails. Do you do that in camera by just leaving the shutter open for a half hour or so, or do you use some kind of software like Star Stacks or something else?
Yeah, exactly. I use Star Stacks. So I do not leave the shutter open for a long time. Instead, the best way of doing it is using your camera's built-in intervalometer, and you just take continuous exposures. And on most cameras, you set it up with a 1-second interval between shots. And to compose star trails, you're generally going to be shooting continuously for between 30 minutes up to a few hours. So you just let that intervalometer roll for that amount of time. And my exposures are usually around 90 seconds each. And then, yeah, like you said, Jeff, I use Star Stacks to composite them.
And this question is for both of you. When you're out doing wildlife photography, how do you approach an animal without disturbing them?
Well, I'll take a turn here. Certainly using long lenses, we're trying not to, get too close to animals because we're using, 600 millimeter lenses, things like that. And, just getting to know, I have a guiding company where we spend so much time in Yellowstone and the Tetons, and we just know all the areas where where the animals are hanging out. We're certainly not trying to sneak around the back, of where animals are hanging out or anything like that. Always being in the general sight of them. And it's grizzly time of year now, so we're certainly out there every day looking for grizzlies and just making sure we keep that 100-yard range there. And
I definitely agree with Neil there. And the thing is, there's a lot of dirty secrets in wildlife photography, and one dirty secret that really keeps the animals safe and the photographer safe is for every species that you want to photograph, there's usually some place on planet Earth where they are already habituated to humans and they gather in mass. So you can reliably approach them without really disturbing them or putting yourself in harm's way. And there's tons of examples of that, like the elk rut in Rocky Mountain National Park and the sandhill crane migrations down at Bosque del Apache, the fishing bears on the Katmai Peninsula. So a lot of times you do have to use caution when getting close to wildlife, but other times you can kind of avoid the danger by going to those well-known places.
Yeah, that's certainly true around here in Wyoming, where we going somewhere habituated is certainly, where grizzlies are used to people. We have numbers around here that there's 1,300 grizzlies in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, and we know about 30 of them, right? So that means that there's a tremendous amount of other bears that we never see that, you wouldn't necessarily want to just go searching 20 miles out in the middle of nowhere for.
So I live in central Wyoming.
Yep.
And actually the best wildlife photo I have is a coyote that actually was in my backyard a couple years ago. My son was homesick from school, so I stayed with him, and he comes to me and, Dad, there's a dog out there. There's a dog. Okay. So I looked and nope, that's not a dog. So I grabbed my camera and out I went and shot some pictures, and they turned out pretty good.
Nice. Absolutely.
Well, yeah, that just speaks to I'd say over half my shots are unexpected, and it's just because I was ready.
How do you prepare for a composition? Is there anything specific you look for? Does it vary depending on what it is, or do you use leading lines typically, or shapes, or something else?
Sure, I'll go first. I do teach people a lot. We're going to brush up on workshops, so I am definitely going to bring up leading lines, rule of thirds with everybody. Those are ancient, old techniques, right? It's not new to photography. It's a painting techniques, things like that. But really, composition is such a hard thing to teach everyone, right? Because it's just the eye of the beholder. It's subjective, right? That's the big term we use. It's subjective. That's a hard thing to teach someone. But I'm certainly going to point out leading lines to people. Like, okay, see this, for instance, in the Tetons here, we have a famous spot where the road bends, and there's the Tetons perfectly there in the background. And I'm certainly going to show a client, hey, see that white line? Put that right in the left corner there, and it'll give you both leading lines and the rule of thirds, because the Teton will be in the top third, things like that. And you can compose like that, and you can also crop later. That's another thing I tell people, because sometimes, for instance, wildlife, you're just getting the shot so quick that, later you'll kind of look at the computer and like, all right, I'll put the animal a little more in the third over here, sort of thing.
Yeah, and I think very few photographers consciously follow any rules of composition, yet I think all of their photos end up adhering to rules of composition. So, when I'm composing a photo, I'm not looking at whether it follows the rule of thirds or contains leading lines or any of that. I mean, I compose completely intuitively, but then when I observe my photos, when I go back and look at them, they all end up following various rules. And I'd also add, like, the heavy hitting rule, of course, is the rule of thirds, but nobody should force their photos into that box, into that grid, because a lot of my photos might follow like the rule of fifths or fourths. It never has to fall into a fraction, but a photo that's split in half and is 50-50 rarely looks balanced. But what I think the biggest tool for composition is, especially landscapes, is pre-visualization. So, Ansel Adams famously said that the single most important tool for landscape composition is pre-visualization. And there's kind of two forms of that. And there's one when you're on site at the shot and you're setting the shot up. And what you do is take inventory of everything in the landscape in front of you, and you decide which of those elements adds impact and which elements which elements are unnecessary and add clutter, and you've kind of arranged them in your mind to create flow and balance, and then you make the composition adhere to that blueprint in your mind as closely as possible. And then another form of pre-visualization is a lot more abstract than that, and that's just as a photographer, as you drive around and observe the landscape and the world around you, you just kind of take note of the most beautiful elements that there are, and you kind of make a mental inventory, and then you just picture these perfect compositions in your mind, whether it's the perfect fiery sunset with a lake with a reflection on mountains, and you look for scenes that match your ideal composition. And if you do that habitually, there's new pathways that form in the brain, and then when you arrive at the shot, you'll just intuitively be able to set it up faster. But that's something that takes practice.
I call that a blessing and a curse. I always say the same thing.
What's the curse part of it?
I can't look at a landscape without seeing that, right? I can't.
Right.
There's math, there's numbers, there's lines. It's like I can't just, I pick it apart. Whether you wanted to or intuitively did it or not, basically.
Right. So everywhere you go, you're always trying to form compositions.
Yeah. Yeah. Whether you're in the city, you're like, oh, look at these lines right here, or you're in the wild. Oh, this tree, there's 3 trees here, all they line up just perfectly there, and
Right. And
also,
go ahead. Sorry.
One last thing on his Ansel Adams quote. He also said that there was really not too many interesting pictures that are ever been taken that don't have an interesting foreground, and how he just stressed how important foreground is to your images.
Absolutely. Yeah. And there's different techniques for composition for different genres. So if we're talking about wildlife photography, the considerations are completely different. So most wildlife photos that entail movement, you really don't have an opportunity to methodically set up a composition. You're really doing the best that you can in like a millisecond, and you have a lot to think about. You're trying to focus on the animal's eyes, and you want to make sure your shutter speed is fast enough to freeze motion, et cetera, et cetera. And you also have to ensure for a good composition. So there's a lot to juggle. But one of the most important things with wildlife photography, particularly with birds, is you're usually pointing up, which means that you have a white background. And the background in wildlife photography is as important as the animal itself. Yep. So you don't want a white background. When you point up into the sky, you want to make sure there's mountains or trees or like big, beautiful cumulus clouds in the background. Because what you have to learn slowly but surely is that some shots just are not worth taking. And if everything doesn't align, maybe it's better to refrain and wait until you do have a good background or good balance to take the shot.
Yep. I found that when I was starting out with photography, I would follow the rule of thirds. I would look for something and make sure that it followed the rule of thirds. And I probably ruined a bunch of pictures that way. Now, like you said, a lot of my pictures do follow that, but I don't go out actually looking for the rule of thirds. The only thing I really look for when I take a picture is balance in that picture. That's the only thing the only thing I pay attention to. And I guess the other thing is I try to simplify it. And by trying to simplify it, I've found that my pictures end up so much better. That way I don't have to constantly be cropping in on little parts of it. And sometimes I still do because I see, I'll get to my computer and wow, there's a picture right there if I crop. But for the most part, just simplification and balance, and it's good to go.
And you hit on something. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I'm sorry. Well, Jeff, I'll go real quick. You just hit on something really crucial. There is, as we all know, photography is the art of subtraction. So if there's two impactful rules, and I really hate to call composition rules, but it's besides the rule of thirds, it's excluding clutter and only including impactful elements. And that takes discipline because landscapes have a lot of beautiful things in them that you want to show, but you have to be critical and picky and only include what really helps convey the narrative.
So, Bryan, you have a book that you published about photography, correct?
Yeah, it's called Infinite Horizons: The Complete Guide to Nature and Landscape Photography, and it came out in February, and I have been working on it for the past 2.5 years.
How did you go about getting that published, and where can we buy a copy?
Yeah, so it's available on Amazon as a Kindle ebook, hardcover, and softcover. Um, how I went about getting it published was uh, so Amazon has a process called KDP, Kindle Direct Publishing. And if you have a book that you want to get published, you get an ISBN number and you copyright it. And then it has to be formatted in a very specific way that meets Amazon standards. And then you upload it. And when people order a copy, it's print on demand, right? So you don't have to store like 10,000 copies in your garage. When somebody purchases one, it gets shipped to them. And Amazon has a network of printers all over the country. So if somebody orders one on the East Coast, the order gets sent to the most strategic printer, and it gets sent to them. But that's kind of a really summarized description of the printing process. But the writing the book was obviously a lot more intensive than that.
Well, I've thought about making a picture book. I don't know if you've ever heard of either of you have ever heard of Sinks Canyon that's just out of Lander. Um, it's where the water goes and disappears into a cave. Essentially, it comes out about a half mile down the road. But I've gone there. I've lived in Wyoming since 2011, and I've gone there so many times I can't even count. But I've got pictures from every month of the year and how it changes, how Posure River changes. It's just pretty impressive. And I thought about making a book that covers how it changes throughout the entire year, but I really wouldn't have any idea how to get started with that.
Yep.
Well, step number one is just write it.
Yep.
Just write it, and then there's free templates available. And then the rest is just kind of a step-by-step process. So you can definitely do it. The hardest part is getting started.
Yeah, to speak on that a little bit myself, I was just recently commissioned to do a book by the Wyoming Housing Authority, and 50 pages later is very inspiring. And of course, being a professional photographer for 23 years, I've always wanted to do book or many books, but just haven't found the time or the inspiration to do it. But it was very inspiring to just getting started, like you're saying, right? It just flowed. Actually came pretty easy to me once you got started.
Yeah, exactly. It kind of writes itself.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll have to just sit down and get started with it and see where it goes, and
There's
hopefully I can come up with something.
well, when you get the gumption to do it, just hit me up, because there are some nitty-gritty details and some pitfalls to avoid, and some just kind of tricks to it. So feel free to hit me up. That goes for anybody, for that matter.
Okay, will do. So let me ask you both, what camera and lens do you choose for landscapes, nature, and why?
I do, at the beginning there, certainly Bryan mentioned a lot of great things doing, astrophotography. I actually truly do everything as well. That's not what they tell you to, do. I went to school for photography. They tell you to pick one thing and be the best at it, but that's not really how my career has worked out. So really I have the whole gamut of lenses, like you're saying, that, just go down the list. Right. And, I have all the prime lenses, like 35, 50, 85, 1.4 lenses. I'm going to use those on portrait shoots, things like that. 14 to 24 millimeter. I'm going to use that for astrophotography. I certainly, like Bryan, I also love doing Milky Way, Northern Lights, star trails, things like that. 24 to 70, I joke that that's like the boring lens that you have to have, because it doesn't give you the bokeh that you want, that the other lenses give that are just so jaw dropping. It's just kind of a ordinary lens, but you have to have it, and at $2,500, it's like, that's kind of a expensive lens. That's just gonna, it's gonna take beautiful pictures. And I've certainly printed a million shots taken with that lens, but the feel that you get from a 70 to 200 or a prime lens, with just the beautiful bokeh, you're not really getting that as much from a 24 to 70 and on up. Like I was saying, a 70 to 200, I could shoot an entire wedding or family portrait with that lens. I just love what it does, blurring the backgrounds. And I always tell people, sometimes it's not how sharp your lenses make your pictures. It's actually how beautifully out of focus it makes the backgrounds. And that's truly, what I love about that 70 to 200 lens. And, and then for telephoto, for wildlife, I have all the different 1 to 400 to 2 to 400 prime, have an older prime, 600 f4 lens that I just love. It's, I've had it for 10 years. Of course, there's the newest lenses, but, for $13,000 10 years ago, I'm still getting plenty of love out of it. And for Nikon, that's a VR2 lens. So
yeah, so I think Neil kind of echoes what I would say, but I will. I definitely have my go-to lenses that I use 90% of the time, even though I might have an arsenal of lenses. And for landscapes, my workhorse is my 16 to 35 f2.8 G Master. I'm based in Colorado, so a lot of the landscapes I shoot are huge and wide, and it's kind of a jack of all trades that doesn't have many drawbacks, and that's I can shoot daytime landscapes, and because it's a fast f2.8 lens, I can shoot astrophotography, and then another genre of photography that I love that's a little bit unconventional is wide angle macro photography that I love to do with that lens. And for listeners who don't know what that is necessarily, this is when you focus the lens at the minimum focus distance, which is about 9 inches or so, 9 or 10 inches. And you place a subject right in front of the lens. So if we're doing, let's say, what's called animal in its environment shots, where there might be a salamander in the foreground and a forest in the background, you've got it nice and close to the lens, so it's relatively large, but then you're showing its habitat in the background. And a really wide angle lens is just the ultimate for that. And kind of in that vein, one of my favorite genres is macro photography. And I'm a huge fan of the Venus Laowa lenses. And I have their 90 millimeter 2x macro lens, and I have their 15 millimeter ultra wide angle macro lens, which is another very unconventional lens. And that lens focuses to 4 millimeters. Okay, so you're basically you're touching the subject. Okay, but the advantage is when you're that close to the subject, it's at what's called 1-to-1 magnification. So it's recorded in life size. So if there's a beetle that's, say, 1 centimeter long in real life, it gets recorded as 1 centimeter on the image sensor. So with that wide angle lens, you've got these macro shots of huge subjects with this really wide angle background, and it's just kind of surreal to look at. And I like those because everybody agrees that photography is fun. I mean, that's why we do it, right? So the act of going out there and capturing shots is fun and enriching. But I don't know how often we think about how fun is it actually to operate the camera. Is that just a necessary evil, or is that also part of the fun? But that's why I like macro, because using these lenses is just, it's super fun for me. And then Jeff, you had also asked about camera body. I shoot with the Sony A7R5, so that's their 61 megapixel full frame. Just because it can pretty much do everything pretty well.
I actually shoot with Panasonic Lumix S1R, which is 42 megapixels, I think. But the autofocus isn't known to be great for things like wildlife, but I don't typically shoot wildlife, so that's
Right.
not a problem. Most of what I do is just landscapes and waterfalls, things like that, sunsets. My absolute favorite go-to lens, well, first of all, like you both said, I have an arsenal of lenses as well. A lot of them just kind of stay tucked away that I rarely touch.
Yeah.
But my favorite lens is a 15 millimeter Voigtlander lens.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely love that lens. It is extremely sharp, contrasty, wide. It's great. It's a manual focused lens, but at that, you got so much depth of field being that wide that you don't really need
Yep.
to worry about focusing most of the time anyway. And that's probably nice for you, Bryan, with 15 millimeter macro lens. Is that's the kind of the problem I've had with macro is there's so little depth of field that it's so easy to, you move your camera a few millimeters and you're out of focus. And that's
Oh
kind
yeah.
of the problem I've had with it. I don't have the only macro lens I have is an old manual focus 58 millimeter macro that I've played
Yeah.
around with, and I've got an extension suit for that as well. It's a Nikon lens that probably manufactured in, I don't know, 1975, but is still a pretty good lens. But being manual focus, doing macro, I do have that problem that I can't keep it in focus. So I don't know if either of you have any tips for that. But also, I have the 28-105, which is just a kit lens. And then I
Mm-hmm.
bought the 20-60, which is a little bit newer lens, but it's cheap. It's about a $200 lens used. And that lens has really impressed me. It's nice having that ultra wide 20 millimeter all the way up to 60 millimeter that you can use for portraits or something like that. It I really like that lens. And then for a telephoto lens, I just have an older cheap 70-300 Canon lens with an adapter, which is the only autofocus adapter you can get for my camera. But the 7300 is fine for a lot of the like kids sports and stuff that I do.
Yeah, I always joke that, we always have those lenses that come out for their 3 seconds of fame, right? You have to have
Yeah.
them, fisheye, for instance. It's just so much fun, but you're not going to sit there and use it all day.
Yeah. There's a lot of tricks and features on modern cameras that I think are probably underused by a lot of people. And Jeff, you were asking about kind of tricks or tips to focus in macro photography, and yeah, there's quite a few. I don't know if you want to call them hacks, but one of them is focus peaking. So focus peaking, for people who don't know, this is a feature that you can turn on where in manual focus, it'll is everything in the photo that is in focus at a given moment will be highlighted in a really bright color. And as you manually focus forward and back, that slice of color will travel through the frame front and back. So if you're doing macro, for example, it's just like wildlife photography. You want to focus on the animal's eyes or the center of the flower or the gills of a mushroom. And that focus peaking can just tell you empirically what's in focus. But with macro, there's two main types of macro, and that is life size macro, which is 1x, and that's what your typical 90 or 105 millimeter macro lens gets you. It gets you 1x, which is enough to fill the frame with creatures like a grasshopper. But a lot of these awesome macro shots that you see of like just the eyes of a jumping spider or just the scales on a butterfly's wing. That's super macro photography, and that requires kind of like a custom setup, right? Where you have to add a macro adapter or extension tubes or a reverse mounted lens to garner even more magnification. And in that case, your heartbeat can literally throw focus off. So that's again where that focus peaking really comes into play.
Yeah, and I've used focus peaking quite a bit. It's definitely nice, especially for manual focusing. It just really changes the game because otherwise you manually focus, like on my old digital SLR. A lot of those were just slightly out of focus, even though they looked in focus to me. Another trick I've found is you can zoom in on the photo using your screen in the back of the camera before you take it. You can actually zoom in and see that real tight and get it focused just right that way as well.
Yeah, I was going to say we were just using focus peaking yesterday. We were photographing 5 different grizzlies in the snow, and you're no matter how good your camera is, it's always struggling with snow falling. And sure enough, it came in perfectly handy yesterday.
Yeah, where you just kind of white field with no contrast and nothing for your camera to grab onto. But no, Jeff, that's a great point with the it's called focus magnification assist. And when you activate that along with focus peaking, it's a pretty powerful duo for focusing on really tough situations.
So Neil, you said you had a guiding company.
Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit about that? I want to go over some workshops that you can both recommend, and let's start there.
So Tristan and I, my girlfriend and I, we have a company called Roam Wild Photo Tours. We've been offering tours for about 4 years now. We do a handful of workshops a year, but it's typically private tours throughout the year. We have permits for Yellowstone and Grand Teton National Park here, but we are certainly looking to branch out to different states, different areas. For instance, I've been to Yosemite over 100 times, and that's not an exaggeration. And I certainly looking to do workshops in Yosemite and Point Reyes, things like that. But primarily, we live here in Jackson Hole, and we're doing these workshops and tours here in the Tetons and Yellowstone. But it's for me, I've had 3 different galleries through my years. And when I started this business 4 years ago, it got me out of the store, right? Even though you have employees, when you have a gallery, you're just in the shop all the time. And I'd much rather be out shooting, right? And so now I get to take people out, teach them. It's 50-50. Half of our clients want to be taught tricks and tips, and half of them just already know what they're doing. They just want to be put in front of the wolves or the grizzlies. And we'll just give them little subtle tips here and there. But it's a lot of fun. It gets me outside. And at 46 years old, I've done 500 weddings. I've thousands of portraits. Had, like I said, 3 galleries. And it's like, okay, what do I want to do in my 50s and 60s? And doing these workshops and tours, it's a lot of fun. And I love teaching people. And we just put online our winter workshops for Yellowstone 2026. We have 2 different ones. We do a fall workshop that's sold out, but I love these winter workshops because it's a snow coach and a by car tour. So the snow coaches bring you to the interior of Yellowstone, and it's just so much fun, right? You really get the place to yourself. There's maybe 20 other coaches out there in the whole park, and everyone's just crossing their fingers hoping what pack of wolves is going to come out today. And last year we had 6 for 6 seeing great wolves, so fingers are always crossed.
That's awesome.
I've looked at your website a little bit for the Roam Wild photo tours, and I got to say, the prices on there are very competitive. Yep. I've seen photo tours in that area that are 3-4 times as much for the same amount of time shooting. So that's appreciated that you offer competitive pricing like that.
We're basing our prices on like the local companies here. I know the big names will come in and it's 15 grand a person kind of stuff. And we're just comparing ourselves to all our local companies and making sure we're in line with them.
And you said you like to shoot during winter. That's
Yeah.
my favorite time to get out and
Yep.
take pictures. Not only, and like you said, there aren't any people. That's probably my favorite part, aside from it being extremely pretty out. I love the ice and the snow, but being able to go somewhere where it's usually crowded and not have a single person there except yourself is really nice.
Yeah, we're in that shoulder season right now too. I mean, it's no secret that when the parks are just opening and when they're just closing, I mean, nobody's here, and you're getting all the animals are up. I mean, not every bear is awake, but like I said, we had 5 grizzlies yesterday with like just a handful of people standing there. Where in 2 months from now, there would be, for one, the animals probably wouldn't even be there because there's too many people around, but it would be 50 people trying to get those photos or more.
A lot of times I'll take my kids to go take pictures with me.
Yeah.
And when the weather turns bad, Dad, are we going to go take pictures? The weather's bad.
Nope. Yeah, that's the best time to get out. Like we'll even have customers saying, "Oh, the weather's supposed to be bad tomorrow. Should we reschedule?" Like, no, that's actually we're really excited that there's going to be some weather, and that brings the wildlife out. We usually just have better, and talking about landscape photography, I mean, we all want the drama from the clouds, and you can't have the rain without rainbows, and you got to have the drama.
Bryan, are there any workshops that you run or that you recommend?
Yeah, so my niche is private custom workshop. So I'll take one person or kind of a group of friends, kind of strategize with them on what they want to learn and where they want to shoot, and take them to virtually anywhere I've shot in the States. I also run photo lessons that I sell individually or in packs, and those are geared towards beginners who literally don't know what an f-stop is. But I am going to be posting a group workshop in the San Juan Mountains for the fall colors coming up in late September.
No, I was lucky enough. I got an old Canon rangefinder camera that was my grandma's. I got when I was probably 10 years old, and I learned then what an f-stop was, what the shutter speed did, what the ISO meant, and I'm pretty fortunate that I learned that at such a young age, because now it's so drilled into me that it doesn't matter what mode I'm shooting in, I can just shoot and not have to think about it because it's just comes natural.
That's one of the beautiful things about being old enough to have shot on film cameras, where if you're shooting a slide, every shot costs 35 cents. So you had to know what you were doing like really early on before you started shooting.
Yep. And slide film was pretty, it's not forgiving as far as getting the exposure wrong, whereas print film was.
Yeah.
Yeah, I consider myself lucky to have shot in the film days as well. My grandfather had a dark room as a kid and went from there. And high school and college, my bachelor's degree is in photography, and it was all film back then. And certainly loved using all the 4x5 and medium format 35 millimeter cameras. And my favorite was a big old slide, like you're saying, a big 4x5 slide, or Provia, Velvia, all those sort of great films. I always had my favorite films. I just loved how different they would feel, right? You'd go out shooting that day knowing, okay, I either wanted all the grain or none of the grain. I wanted either really gritty film or just sharp, razor sharp.
Yeah, I liked the extra film for really sharp.
Yeah.
I've never shot.
I love the 3200 T-Max, and just grainy as could be, and really all those Tri-X 400. A lot of those were really, really grainy.
I've shot 120 film quite a bit, but I've never shot 4x5 or 8x10.
That really slows you down, right? I had a camera where I had 4 magazines, so two pictures on each magazine. So you go out one day with 8 shots. So each shot's really got to count, right? You got to really want that photo, and it slows you down with composing. That's for sure.
I'd love to try a good large format camera, just a field camera, and just play around with that. And yeah, it would definitely slow me down. You can't just go click, click, click.
Yeah.
I mean, did either of you have any tips or tricks that you wanted to share with listeners?
It's kind of back to what we were saying. I think the number one thing is strive for simplicity, and I'll just give you some examples of lengths that I go to, and Neil probably does too. But I'll go to extremes to exclude, tree branches and rocks that don't belong there. So I have a pickup that I shoot out of, and I built a rooftop platform so that it elevates me above roadside shrubs. And if I'm shooting, let's say, lakeside, and I just want to get a perfect reflection with no distracting elements in the foreground, I'll wade out into the water. And then I'm just really cognizant of just extraneous objects sticking into the frame that shouldn't be there, because just a few stray branches or leaves can make the difference between an award winner and just a mediocre shot.
My advice would be to watch the edges, to move your eye around the edges constantly, because that's where you're going to get distractions that pull your eye out of the photo. And by watching those edges, just moving your eye in a circle constantly, you can learn to avoid that.
Yeah.
A few things that come to mind to me, because I'd say, we're out in these beautiful parks all the time, but most of our customers, 80, 90%, they're interested in wildlife. So I'm getting hands-on with people with their autofocus options, and how quickly they can go from one autofocus mode to the next. So I try to get customers, having their custom buttons, dialed in, where they're not digging deep in a menu of like, oh God, where's like this bird mode, that I'm looking for. And to just quickly go back and forth between these autofocus modes. And that's what I'd suggest to people, right? Is how quick can you do this stuff? And so at that same time, not trying to adjust all three things at the same time. Wildlife probably is, one of the fastest thing you have to think as you're shooting. So I'm trying to tell people don't be trying to adjust your ISO and shutter speed and aperture all at the same time. You'll make yourself dizzy. And so just pick one of these things. Like what variable is changing? Is it a cloudy day that all of a sudden it's sunny, 5 minutes later it's cloudy, 5 minutes later? So you don't want to just be changing all three of your numbers. Pick one. We all kind of know these rules of shutter speed. We don't want to go too low where it's going to blur the image. We're using constant f-stops a lot with these lenses, so we don't really have a whole lot of range with your f-stop. You can only go so wide open, right? So you kind of have constants and variables where, okay, your constant is your f-stop. You don't have any more room. You're at f4 and that's it. Your shutter speed, that's also a constant. You can't go lower than a certain shutter speed. And then, so your variable becomes your ISO. So don't be trying to change all these things. Just change your ISO up and down. And last thing about those autofocus modes, with the custom buttons, is even living here, I know we still have these distractions, right? That we keep talking about. You have this blade of grass, you have this tree branch over on the side. And even with the best, latest autofocus cameras systems, is your camera's still picking up this blade of grass in front of the grizzly, and you're like, his eyes are right there. Why are you picking up this blade of grass? And I want my customers to know what good old spot focus button is. And then you got your animal modes, your bird modes, but you got to know how to go just back to that simple old style spot focus, because that's sometimes you're just fighting these autofocus modes in these cameras so much. You just need to be able to go back to that. But these bird modes these days with the it's just amazing where you'll sit there with an owl or an eagle and you're like waiting for it to fly. And now, you can burst off like 60 pictures in a row and it flies away. And if you're in bird mode, you're going to get every single one of them is going to be tack sharp, where 10 years ago, I'd maybe get like 5 out of 50 pictures to be tack sharp, or, those sort of odds. So, that's kind of some things I try to make sure everyone who's with me is doing all that stuff as quick as possible.
Yeah, that the eye tracking autofocus has been an absolute game changer. It's one of the biggest advancements in camera tech in the past, I'd say, 5 years. And if somebody's interested in getting into specifically wildlife photography, getting a camera with that eye tracking ability, it's worth the extra money. Because like Neil said, your success rate capturing a bird launching, maybe it was like, I don't know, 1 in 500 back in the day.
Yep.
And
10%
now
it's 99%.
Yeah, it's really amazing. You see in social media all these incredible shots of birds with their eyes focused and their wings spread in the perfect pose. And they're almost a dime a dozen, where, 3 years ago, you might have seen one every few months. And that's all thanks to bird tracking or animal tracking eye focus.
And that's where my camera really stinks, is the autofocus. It has animal tracking autofocus and eye tracking and all that, but it has only contrast detect autofocus. It does not have phase detect autofocus, which really hinders it.
Yeah.
I was hinting at that a little bit. That is something here in this area we struggle with, right? The moose is dark, the grizzly is dark. We have these dark animals with dark eyes, and then there's not enough contrast. I mean, even still, I know you can go to other areas and the eye detection is working perfectly, but here cameras still struggle with it a little bit, right? That eye is not as pronounced on that grizzly bear as, say a bird or something like that. So it's still got a little ways to go. It's not perfect.
Yeah.
Bryan, where can we find your work? Do you have a website, Facebook, Instagram, or something else we can look up?
Yeah, I have all that. If you go to www.wildernessshots.com, you can find a link to all of my social media, and I've got a link on there to Amazon where you can buy my book. So yeah, I've got Facebook and Instagram.
Neil, where can we look up your work?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, a big part of, like we've been talking about, I do sell a lot of pictures on my website there. That has been, a big part of my business for a long time. Very grateful for all the customers I've had through the years. And, but basically I try to make a post every day or two on Instagram and Facebook, and hopefully if people like that image and, they'll want to purchase it someday. And, but all my business stuff is all under the same name, Neil Simmons Photography. And so Instagram, Facebook, and my website is neilsimmonsphotography.com. And
great. Thank you for sharing those. And thank you both for being on today with me. That was really fun to talk and get to know a little bit more about your types of photography and about photography in general. Thank you very much for joining, and we'll talk to you later.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Neil and Jeff.
Thank you.
This was the Rocky Mountain Photography Show. Please visit us online at RockyMountainPhotoshow.com. Thank you for listening and have a great day.